You could feel the love at the White House podium this week.
I love the president, and I'm very, very loyal to the president. I want to serve the president. I love the mission that the president has. I think he's got some of the best political instincts in the world and perhaps in history. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was new White House Communications Director Anthony Scaramucci. We're here with our panel now, and David Urban, who won Pennsylvania for Trump, and boy, Scaramucci also doing double duty, but you're a press guy today as well. Said a lot of very forceful and effusive things. Mike Allen of Axios wrote that Trump is building a wartime cabinet, that's part of what's going on right now in terms of the shuffling. Is Scaramucci part of that?
Yeah, I think Anthony is a guy the president likes, has a great deal of confidence in, was on the team early as a great defender, very articulate, great-looking guy, big head of hair. Engages with you, Jake, very nicely for a half hour. It was a pleasure to watch. Is a smart guy. The president trusts him, likes him, and I don't think he's building the wartime guy. I think he's putting in some new players. I think Sean Spicer, great patriot, like the guy, I've known him for a long time. Anthony just brings a different skill set to the table.
What do you think?
I love that interview as well. He's a happy warrior. I did have to note though the tweets that he had before. I mean, if you told me that the president was going to appoint head of communications who was pro-choice, anti-gun, pro-gay marriage, who'd praised Hillary Clinton, who'd called Trump a hack, who is pro-climate or believes in climate change, who is anti-wall, you know, I'd say that's my kind of guy.
Well, he doesn't hold those positions anymore, though.
Right, well, but no, that's not necessarily true. He's there.
Trump held most of those positions.
So I would say that, you know, as a communications director, you're there, you represent your client. Anthony represents the client, the president of the United States. Anthony's views are not material here. The president's views are material.
No, I totally agree. But don't you think that inside of the base there will be some like, what is this?
I think the base will judge performance by performance, not by Anthony's views.
What did you think?
I think it's clear that the RNC faction's marriage with the Trump group was rocky, and this is another part of that. He's from the more New York crowd. I think as a result, he doesn't have to reach out all the time to Trump and say, look, I'm proving myself. And you see that in a more relaxed demeanor. But there is love there. There's effusive love there. The question is that love for a purpose, which is to bolster himself with the president in such a way that he can go in there and go, look, here's what I think we should do. And I think he could bring a plan for communications that it doesn't seem to me that the White House has right now. It's just personalities instead of a portfolio and a plan. If he could bring a plan and convince the president that that would do him well, I think they would be moving in a better direction.
Look, Donald Trump continues to treat his life as if it's a reality TV, and it's not to me it's not a communications problem here. That's not what the issue is. You have an unpopular president who's pursuing unpopular policies, and who also is getting worsening and deepening with legal problems. That is where we are with this president right now, and the things that he has been able to pass, because he hasn't been able to pass any major pieces of legislation, has been divisive and unpopular as well. The Muslim ban, if you look at the Paris Accord, pulling us out of that deal, trying to get rid of Obamacare. That's what he's trying to do, and that is the problem, is Donald Trump, not who the communications director
Corinne, I would say
is.
there's a communications issue in that unemployment, right? We've heard low unemployment here, 4.4%, stock market through the roof, regulations cut, defense spending up. I mean, this president's doing lots that is not being communicated effectively. I think you heard Anthony talk about it. I think you heard John King talk about it earlier this morning. I think you'll hear a lot more of that. So I do think, I disagree with you. I think there's a communications issue.
But here's the thing. So he has these themes of the week. Last week was Made in America, which is ironic because you're talking about a campaign that was made in Russia. But anyway, with that, but he blows it up. Donald Trump blows it up every week. So he cannot keep on message.
So, and that was something I tried to get at with him. But Anthony basically seemed to send the message that there is no getting, the president can't step on himself because he's the president, we all work for him.
Look, I think there's some truth in the fact that, like, he's equal parts disease and remedy sometimes, because he is the reason that he's in the White House, and it is because he did things drastically differently that he got there. So there's reason that he thinks that he should keep doing this. If there is somebody on something like an infrastructure week who has the authority, and no one has thus far, to say, look, this is how we should do things, and you shouldn't blow it up, they could be on a slightly better path than they are on now. The question is he that person? Is anyone that person?
Yeah, I mean, you've got a president, though, that is now talking about this issue of pardoning. There's a reason why there's no precedent for can a president pardon himself. It's because no president in the history of the republic has had the audacity or the moral depravity to think that he's above the law. If he did, let's just assume that he does something dramatic like that, he would throw the country into a constitutional crisis. You would have that going up to the Supreme Court. He's appointed the fifth vote on the Supreme Court. Anthony Kennedy, please stay on. If he did that, Congress would you'd see the Kraken rise up. Congress would step in if he decided he was going to fire Mueller. You'd have state attorneys general stepping in. You would have the Congress.
But he's also not doing those things yet.
Right.
Like, those aren't material.
I think it's a long.
David.
I just think it's a long, long way, Governor. The tweet, what the president tweeted out wasn't, "I'm looking to pardon myself." He said, "The president's authority to pardon is complete." That's not what it said. So let's not read
why would he tweet
expansively.
Yeah, why would he tweet that?
Look, the president, as you heard, I watched your show last night with Michael Smerconish, good lawyer, right? As a good lawyer would do, you look at all your options that are on the table. He's not saying
they're sending a message to Mueller. They're saying to Mueller, "You better rein in, or I am going to be able to fire him."
Governor, I disagree with you. I disagree completely. I think the president was simply saying my ability to pardon is complete. Don't read that more expansively. I'm not.
Look, usually there's always a lot of noise coming out of the White House, and it's not really clear what signal to pay attention to. He made it really clear last week. It was his intentions on what he wanted to do, which is if he wants to either obstruct or derail this investigation. And if he doesn't do that, he wants to get Sessions out of the way and to make sure that Mueller is fired.
You disagree with
I disagree. Listen, I disagree. Look, I disagree.
I mean, he said if I'd known that Sessions was going to recuse himself, I never would have given him the job.
Because I think the president was entitled to that information before you appoint somebody. If you say, I'm gonna step down as soon as I get appointed, I think you should probably know that before being appointed.
But the math, the chronology of that doesn't work out, David. He was named in November. His testimony for confirmation hearing was January, and then he recused himself in March. How was he supposed to know in November that any of this stuff was going to happen?
Yeah, I understand, but I think that if your point, Jake, but I understand. I think if the president he'd have gone to the president beforehand and said, no, I'm saying before he did it, I think he should have had a discussion with the president. Is my point.